The haunting entered him next. At dinner, he heard a chair scrape in the empty place beside him. In bed, he woke with salt in his mouth. During Mass in the private chapel, he saw Elise standing behind the altar with the wet charter folded like a communion cloth in her hands. He stopped shaving. He stopped sleeping. He began speaking to the portraits as if negotiating with a court. By the third week, he insisted the house had mistaken him for itself. This was almost true. In the autumn of 1755, on a blade of French coast where the Atlantic broke against black stone, the Chateau de Virac stood above the sea with its windows turned outward like cold eyes. Its chapel was private, its cellars cut into the cliff, and the tide struck below the foundations like doors closing under the earth. The master was Marquis Lucien de Virac, 29, handsome in the severe manner of men raised beneath portraits, convinced that bloodline was permission. He had inherited debt, land, servants, fishing rights, and the belief that anyone born beneath him existed only until his comfort required otherwise. That was what the dead learned about him first. Her name had been Elise Morvan. She was 26, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, the daughter of Virac's former steward, and educated because her father had once believed books could protect a poor person better than prayer. After his death, Elise remained in the chateau as copyist and keeper of accounts. She knew where Lucien's rents were false. Most dangerously, she knew of an old charter granting the fishing women of St. Cyr perpetual access to the lower shore. Lucien wanted that shore closed. A private harbor would bring profit. A royal contract might restore the family's failing glory. The poor could carry their nets elsewhere, he said. Elise refused to alter the charter. The third time she refused, he summoned her after midnight to the West Gallery, where ancestral portraits watched from gilt frames and the cliff wind pressed wet breath through the shutters. By morning, Elise Morvan had vanished. Lucien said she had stolen documents and fled. A maid had heard a cry near the sea door, but by noon she had withdrawn the claim. A fisherman found one torn sleeve on the cliff briars. The charter vanished with her. The shore was closed before winter. At first, Lucien mistook quiet for victory. Then the mansion began returning what he had taken. It started with salt. Salt appeared in the West Gallery, scattered beneath the portraits in a thin white line, as though the sea had walked there barefoot during the night. The servants swept it away. Each morning it returned. On the fourth day, the salt formed one word across the black floor. Rendre. Give back. Lucien ordered the floor washed. By evening, the word had risen again along the lower edge of his father's portrait, pushing through the paint as if the canvas had learned to rot into language. The chaplain called it damp, and Lucien accepted the word because damp could be repaired. The next sign came from the household ledger. A column of rents changed while Lucien watched it. Ink thinned, crawled backward, and rewrote one name over every false correction. Elise Morvan. He threw the ledger into the fire. The pages burned. The name did not. It remained for several seconds in the flame, black letters hanging in orange light, and then collapsed into ash shaped like a woman's hand. That night, The sea entered the mirrors, not as reflection, as depth. Lucien stood before the tall mirror in his dressing room and saw behind his own shoulder a moonless waterline. A woman stood waist-deep in the dark, hair spread across the water, face turned away. When he turned, the room was empty. When he looked again, the woman had come closer. Water dripped from the mirror frame onto his shoes. At 3 in the morning, all 27 portraits in the West Gallery turned their eyes toward his door. The servants found him there at dawn, pale, shouting that someone had moved them. No one had. The nails were undisturbed. The frames hung straight. Only the eyes had changed. Every ancestor looked not outward, but down, toward the cliff. Virac became a house people entered only because poverty commanded them to. At night, the closed shore glimmered below, with lanterns no living fisherman carried. Wet footprints crossed the chapel aisle from door to altar. In the nursery, long unused, a child's slate filled with copies of the same phrase. Not stolen, not fled, not mad. Lucien tried to leave for Nantes. The carriage horses stopped at the estate gate and would not move. Their eyes rolled white. Foam silvered their mouths. The driver crossed himself and quit before evening. So Lucien remained in the house that had begun to learn him. On the 7th night, Elise appeared fully, not in a mirror, not in a dream, in the West Gallery, beneath the portrait of Virac's first marquis. Lucien entered with a lantern and pistol, intending, in the lunatic logic of fear, to shoot whatever poverty had invented to embarrass him. She stood barefoot on the salt line. Her dress was torn at one sleeve. Her hair hung wet against her throat. Along the side of her face, from temple to jaw, ran a dark bruise in the shape of fingers. She did not speak. That was worse. Lucien fired. The ball passed through her and struck the portrait behind. The painted face of the first marquis split open. Behind the canvas was a recess. Inside lay papers wrapped in oilcloth. Elise raised one hand and pointed at the wound his bullet had made in the family image. By morning, the servants found Lucien kneeling among torn canvas and documents, laughing softly in a voice that did not belong to mirth. The charter had been hidden there, not destroyed. Hidden by Lucien himself on the night she died, because some part of him had known even then that stolen law was safer than burned law. Beneath it lay Elise's final copy, stained at one edge with seawater and blood. There was also a letter addressed to the magistrate. In it, Elise had written that Lucien intended to alter the shore rights, falsify rents, and close St. Kyr's access to the sea. At the bottom, the line broke off mid-sentence, as if the hand writing it had been seized. Lucien ordered the papers locked away. The lock rusted shut before the key turned. He ordered the gallery sealed. The door swelled in its frame and would not close. He ordered every portrait removed. The men who tried came down the stairs pale in fear, each insisting the frames had grown warm and gripped them back. From that hour, Lucien no longer commanded Virac. He occupied it. The haunting entered him next. At dinner, he heard a chair scrape in the empty place beside him. In bed, he woke with salt in his mouth. During Mass in the private chapel, he saw Elise standing behind the altar with the wet charter folded like a communion cloth in her hands. He stopped shaving. He stopped sleeping. He began speaking to the portraits as if negotiating with a court. By the third week, he insisted the house had mistaken him for itself. This was almost true. Elise had not awakened alone. She had awakened the foundation. The final night came during a storm. The tide rose higher than anyone in St. Cyr had seen. Waves struck the cliff hard enough to shake dust from the chapel rafters. Wind forced itself through every shutter of the chateau, carrying the smell of kelp, rain, and opened graves. Lucien was found in the west gallery, dressed as if for court, wearing his father's signet ring and carrying the pistol with no shot left in it. All the portraits had gone blank. Not dark, blank. Faces, coats, hands, names beneath the frames, every inherited certainty had vanished into raw canvas. Only one image remained. Elise Morvan stood in the first marquise frame, holding the shore charter against her breast. Lucien began to scream that she had no right. The house answered. Every door opened. The gallery filled with salt water to the depth of a footprint, though no ceiling leaked and no window broke. From the blank portraits came whispering, the sound of names being removed from mouths that had owned too much. Lucien ran, not away from Elise, toward the cliff path. Madness often chooses the oldest road available. Servants watched as he crossed the terrace into the storm. They said he shouted at the sea as though commanding it to withdraw. They said he called himself Virac until the word broke apart under the wind. Elise followed at a walking pace. She was seen by 3 people and denied by none. At the cliff edge, Lucien stopped. Below, the Atlantic opened and closed on black stone. Behind him, the chateau stood with every window lit, though no servant had touched a candle. He turned once, not to the house, to something beside him. Those nearest swore he looked suddenly calm, as if the last mercy madness had offered him was certainty. Then he stepped backward over the edge. No one heard him strike the rocks. The sea was too loud or too willing. By dawn, the storm had ended. Lucien's body was found wedged among the lower stones, one hand still closed around his signet ring. His face, those who saw it said, carried an expression not of terror, but of offended disbelief. The charter was delivered to the magistrate before noon. No one knew by whom. The shore of St. Cyr reopened. The parish record was corrected. Elise Morvan was entered not as fugitive, not thief, but murdered. The Chateau de Virac never passed cleanly to another heir. Its portraits remained blank. The west gallery smelled of salt, even in dry weather. And sometimes, when fog climbed from the sea, a woman could be seen inside the first marquise frame, watching the cliff with the stillness of one who had finally been named. Wealth may purchase silence, law may kneel before lineage, and a house may shelter cruelty long enough for cruelty to call itself tradition. But the dead are patient where the powerful are vain, and every stolen name waits in stone, salt, blood, or weather until the world that buried it opens beneath the guilty and leads them down into the light beyond shadow.